Okay, so let's go ahead and get started for one of our last regular content sessions. We're going to spend next week doing management scenarios based on your hard work on your national park all semester long. Toward that end, earlier today I posted on our course website just a template file for basically a place sort of clearly organized to throw the bits of info you've been gathering all semester long relative to each kind of resource at your national park. So this is a long document, mostly because I've put a space for every single thing that we've kind of talked about so far. So if your park doesn't have a particular class of resources like surface flowing waters, just delete that whole section of the template and say, no water here, have a nice day. Okay? So I don't want you to see the page count and get freaked out. Again, each one of these answers to these things is like a sentence or two, and you already know most of these answers and so forth. So there's not really any wrong answers or single sort of blessed way to do this, but for like one of the first classes of resources we talked about this semester back in August was landscape resources. So to the extent that you have any landscape, like regional area resources, you can put those in and cut off the rest of the list. And then just kind of work through each thing. What are the impacts to those landscape resources at your park? List them, if any, that you're aware of. Any moderating factors, like we've talked about for each class of resources, right? And then what are some management strategies and tactics? So on our course website, there are copies of the textbook for our class. It is Studies in Outdoor Recreation, 3rd edition by Robert Emmett Manning and a whole bunch of his co-researchers over the years. And if you take a look at chapter 13, it's all about management strategies and tactics. Now, we've also already talked about management strategies, the large sort of broad groupings of what you can do. And the tactics filed under each one, remember there are 4 big management strategies. So I'm giving you a space for pick, let's say 2 management strategies for each of these classes of resources as they pertain to your park, right? So maybe your first management strategy is pretty mild on the landscape. It's something like, I'm going to modify visitor use. That's our strategy. And the tactic underneath that would be using information and education. All that stuff's lined out in diagram. There are big tree charts explaining a ton of different example management strategies and tactics under each one of those 4 strategies. So you don't have to invent anything here, right? It's just kind of picking what might be an easy first, easy, cheap first, early, quick to deploy strategy to tackle whatever impacts are listed for your particular type of resource at your park. And then a second one. And I've kind of mapped out so you don't even have to write these sentences here and figure out what to say. It's just this first management strategy will, and then you pick from this list. Wholly prevent, delay onset of, reduce the severity of, spatially move, modify the crucial pathway of, whatever the impact dynamic is that you've chosen to tackle with your strategy and tactic, okay? So you just delete all the stuff that doesn't apply, and that's your sentence for that section of it, okay? So, again, it's multiple pages long, and that's okay, because you're writing like maybe a quarter of a page, maybe up to a quarter of a page of stuff for each one of these different areas of different classes of resources, okay? So this is just a template. If you've already shot ahead and are a real go-getter, like Lydia, for example. Lydia, you sent me yours by email the other day? Nice work. You don't have to use this template at all, so Lydia doesn't have to rework her stuff to fit this. This is just one example of how professionals tackle stuff like this in parks, okay? So this is linked on the front page of our course website, and it is this file right here. It's just a Word document, and You should be able to download that, modify it to your needs, and either send it to the course Dropbox or, like Lydia, to the email address. Okay? Cool. So, as we talked about on Monday, you have until 11:59 p.m. on Friday, December 15th, to send this thing in. Plenty of time. But to the extent that we've kind of already figured most everything on almost the entire document out already, with like all of our activities this whole semester, you've been going back and forth to the National Park Service website to check out your park and learn more about it. Just go ahead and open it up at some point and start dumping in a sentence here, a sentence here, a sentence here. Pretty quickly you'll see that this thing is completed. Okay? Cool. And again, if you have already set up a document that's got a bunch of your thoughts and stuff recorded as you've had a chance to put some things together so far, then you don't have to worry about downloading this. You can take a look at it just to see if the format is similar or whatever, but I'm not really interested in making you fill out a whole bunch of like PDF locked forms or anything like that. Just, you know, get your ideas on paper in some recognizable order and structure, and I could probably figure it out. Okay? Cool. Any questions about our semester-long project? It's good. All right, cool. If you do have any questions, feel free to text me or email me. That is fine. I will see a text message long before I see your email. Okay? Okay. Cool beans. Let's continue on with talking about categories of resources here. So we started off the conversation on Monday talking about how sound is a property of air and or any fluid, right? Sound is transmitted through water, for example, as well. And it is also transmitted through the fluid of your blood and your tissues. So that means that at some of the quietest places on the surface of the earth, which we'll talk a little bit about what makes a place more quiet or noisy than others, there is no perfectly silent place on the face of the planet. That just is not physically possible. But when you get visitors, your recreationists, to a spot that is ecologically extremely quiet, and national parks in the United States are almost the only places in the United States, literally, where you have even the possibility of finding a place that's quiet, your visitors can have a pretty unnerving experience, as it turns out. They can hear the blood pumping in the vessels in their inner ear. And it is a surreal moment when people realize what's happening. It's a little bit unsettling. There's a reason that things like horror movies, for example, use sampled recordings of things like human heartbeats and breath and stuff like that. Very quiet sounds can be unsettling, as it turns out. So, further to our conversation about A-weighted decibels, that is the range of frequencies that humans can hear from very low pitches at 2,000 hertz to very, very high pitch sounds at close to 20,000 hertz. And then that upper ceiling decreases as you get older, typically. We'll talk about some physiological effects of sound on humans and on our bodies and our minds, like our early example on Monday of kids unable to take a test above about 90 decibels in a classroom setting. Physically unable to take a test. All right, cool. So with this definition of soundscape, which is pretty open-ended, right? The aural environment, that is the audio perceptual environment, as described by sound pressure and sound attributes. We'll pick apart that list of attributes here in a bit. That's a super broad definition, right? That has to be able to fit to some level on every square meter on the surface and below the surface of the planet, anywhere there is life. So let's take an example from the field of what this actually sounds like. Here's a recording from summer camp a couple of years ago here.
All right, class, here we are on the trail between Nymph Lake and Dream Lake at Rocky Mountain National Park and see if we can capture how the soundscape changes as we round a simple corner. Below us are a series of waterfalls, and the change is remarkable. Alright class, here we are in the trail between Nymph Lake and Dream Lake at
after the
Rocky Mountain National Park.
Recorder rounds the corner,
capture how the soundscape changes as we round a simple...
The whole idea here is that landscape profoundly affects things like soundscape. Both from the perspective of the topographic relief and the water resources present, surface flowing water in this case, alpine streams that are basically snowmelt off of the rocky ice caps, or snowfields. We put those things together and we have waterfalls. And that is a kind of natural sound called hydrophony. So correspondingly, we also have kinds of sound that we group as geophony, non-living natural sources of sound. We have biophony, things or sounds made by things that are alive, not just flowing water. We also have anthrophony, which is sounds made by humankind. Now, anthrophony is not necessarily the noise pollution component, right? There are good sounds and there are bad sounds. That is, pleasing sounds, euphonic sounds, and discordant sounds that don't sound so good. Those discordant sounds we call noise because they bother us. They affect us physiologically and mentally, okay? So, again, noise is the subset of sounds that you identify as irritating, negative, in particular distracting, and sounds that interfere with your ability to maintain your safety in the wild. So if it's a little bit too noisy or windy, right? So wind we would not consider noise, that would be geophony. If it's a little bit too windy to hear the savanna lion stalking you in sub-Saharan Africa, then that geophony, that natural sound, is interfering with your ability to hear that predator, and it's about to become a real problem. So noise, to the extent that noise tends to be much more intrusive on your cognition and perception of your environment, and much more synthetic in nature, and synthetic sounds, just like synthetic fertilizers or synthetic anything else, they tend to be more concentrated, more powerful, more injurious or damaging to sort of overpower what we are naturally evolved or designed, depending on your theology, to be able to cope with over time. So there's a reason that we zone like surface mining away from residential areas. We zone industrial parks away from recreational parks. The sounds that get transmitted from one to the other are genuinely deleterious to our health. Okay? So, that is a subjective evaluation. If you remember your freshman year on campus, in the dorms, right, there are noise rules and stuff like that. And to the extent that the person over in Stiegel Hall, if you were in the Living Learning community for forestry back in the day, to the extent that there was somebody on the floor up above you playing, you know, a first-person shooter game with a big subwoofer hooked to their gaming rig and stuff like that, and you can hear sort of the simulated gunfire sounds and stuff like that at 2, 3, 4 in the morning while you're trying to sleep, right? That is subjectively bad for you. It's waking you up, and it's subjectively not noise at all for the person playing the game. It's actually enhancing the experience, right? So we want to be very careful to tease out the subjective versus the objective portions, the descriptors of these different sounds. In the same way that very basic use level at your national park is just some objective number. that use level, or that use density, people per hectare, people per acre, people per viewshed, area that you can see other people in, that's just an objective number. But that might be a higher number or a lower number than the subjective evaluation of how many people is too many people in a place. We call that crowding. It's one of our primary impacts of poorly managed recreation. We do all kinds of stuff that destroys the environment when we feel crowded. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen relative to the subjective sense of what's crowding appropriate for this picnic area or this section of trail or this this beautiful lakeside sort of opening where a lot of people are hanging out at Nymph Lake or Lake Hiaha or Bear Lake at Rocky Mountain National Park like we saw. Okay? So, subjective versus objective. We want to hold firmly to each of those and understand that they are very separate things. All right, so biophony, sounds from wildlife and other living sources. This is primarily songbirds, insects, arthropoda, that are using sounds to communicate both mating intention, territoriality, alert homogeneous members of their species to predator incursion, for example, stuff like that. Okay, so that biophony, not very loud. At Rocky Mountain National Park, for example, when we did a bunch of this ecoacoustics research, we found that the daytime average sound pressure, the loudness of bird song, plus all those beautiful whitewater streams and waterfalls, plus the wind filtering through the Rocky Mountains, which can be pretty loud at times, and so forth. All of that together, on average, is only 35 decibels. And decibels, A-weighted decibels in our case, are a non-linear scale that is a tiny fraction of the sound energy of something like 55 decibels, like about what I'm talking to you right now. So at this distance, you're hearing me at between 50 and 55 decibels, most likely. Okay? So, somebody talking, even if the birds can continue chirping and stuff like that, we can overlay, because it's an approximately similar frequency, and the louder sound obscures or occludes or blocks out the softer sounds. And so after a while, the birds just kind of give up singing because it's not doing them any good in a noisy environment. Okay? So that's biophony. Let's take a listen at a couple of different examples of biophony and some anthrophony as well. So these sound exactly like what you expect them to. These are acoustic recordings made by, most of these are made by the Soundscapes Research Center at Fort Collins for the National Park Service. I believe I recorded the First Nation Cultural Soundscape and maybe the bird-dominated soundscape at Land Between the Lakes. We'll take a look at those. Now, we're artificially increasing the volume of this so that you can hear it. It's not actually that loud out in the wild. Although some species of frogs can hit 140 decibels no problem, right? That's like permanent hearing damage for any period of exposure time-wise. All right, birds tend to create a ton of biophony at dawn and dusk. So at dawn and dusk we have the dawn or dusk chorus, as it's called, and it's a whole bunch of different songbirds all kind of marking territory, letting everybody know everybody else's business for up to about an hour before and after sunrise and sunset. So when we're doing ecoacoustics research to figure out how much is human noise impacting the basic function of songbird species, for example, to do things like attract a mate and enjoy a successful mating test and stuff like that, we're generally programming the audio recorders to automatically record continuously or sample like every X minutes for an hour before and after sunrise and sunset. And then maybe a little bit during the middle of the day, but overnight, there's not a lot of bird sounds among most species. But of course, with nocturnal bird species, we want to know if they're present, so we'll typically capture some of those recordings as well, just to make sure we're not missing anything by sampling improperly. So each species has what's called an acoustic niche. That is, it has a certain much smaller frequency range than 2,000 to 20,000 hertz, which is an order of magnitude frequency-wise. It's a lot of octaves. Okay? Each one of these birds can't vocalize typically across that entire range, so it needs its particular pitch range. Let's say 10,000 hertz to 10,500 hertz, kind of mid-range within human hearing. So a lot of instruments, for example, play right through that range of 10,000 plus. If a bird has to compete with human noise just specifically within that range, then it doesn't matter if there's noise pollution anywhere else in the acoustic range. Its full vocal apparatus and its social mechanism is tied to that particular area that's getting wiped out. So, for example, have you heard any cars or trucks that emit at a steady state at 70 miles an hour on the highway at a certain pitch? Yes, no? Can you imagine in your mind's eye, or your mind's ear, a motorcycle rolling down 13 at 70 miles an hour, dodging cops, carving the car-shaped pylon, right? That happens at a certain pitch of the engine. It's the frequency of the transmission and so forth. And that causes a certain pitch to get blasted out in all directions from that emission source, that noise source. And to the extent that a bird's trying to call as a bunch of motorcycles are going by, within that pitch range, it's like the bird doesn't, it's like the internet goes out for the bird, right? Your phone just stops working. And you know that sort of horrible clenching situation of, oh God, why isn't my phone starting? Imagine that all day, every day in your habitat, okay? So, how about a cultural soundscape? So this is anthrophony. This is not noise. This is, if I recall correctly, this is a cultural presentation of Great Plains Native American groups demonstrating dance and song, like ritual, that they use as a part of their cultural practice today. Cool. It's soft, but can you hear it? Okay, so a sort of Western culture analog of what you just heard might be something like reading your morning news, or calling a family member to say how you doing. I know nobody uses the phone anymore, but imagine if you were like actually using your voice to, communicate with people instead of texting. Or something like a church service, for those of you who grew up in church, mosque or synagogue, whatever. Okay? Sounds convey very important functional information for humans and for wildlife species, and so when that gets interrupted or masked by noise, it's a problem. Alright, so here's a nocturnal soundscape. One of the attributes of sound, based on the particular species emitting it, is the sound continuous? Or does it have a start and a stop, like those coyote calls? Is the species adapted to layer a bunch of calls, like a coyote mob call, to obscure their number and make it more difficult to locate and range as a prey species from the predator? Or is it a continuous sound, like an HVAC system? Until I mention it, were you hearing that? Right? Continuous sounds are easier to ignore, but they still impact the soundscape on an ecological function level. Okay? This last one, the industrial cultural soundscape, is from, I believe, a national heritage corridor like the Blackstone or the Cuyahoga Valley. Basically a national park created to record our sense of our history throughout the Industrial Revolution in the United States, which is a pretty big deal back in the day. Your foghorns, right? Factory sounds, hammering, rushing sounds, etc., etc. All right, so picture you are a creature that has evolved to function within an acoustic niche, and then these weird hairless monkeys called humans arrive and set up a national park and put in a lodge and bring in RVs with generators and tour buses and Bluetooth speakers and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, this biosphere reserve area isn't particularly hospitable. So some of our national parks aren't that big. Acadia National Park, 75,000 acres, and gets, what, 4.5 million visitors a year? That's a lot of people per acre. And so if you're a wildlife species, you're having to compete with millions of people a year just on the basis of sound pollution. Okay. So, as foresters, we want to remember, oh yeah, we talk about trees and vegetation and stuff like that quite a bit. So we want to think about one of the overriding factors that determines how much of a problem noise pollution is going to be on a particular landscape or particular ecosystem within your national park. That is vegetative cover. So, has anybody ever been like hiking, backpacking, camping in the boreal forest? So the northern forests, great continental forests of Canada, northern New England, stuff like that. All right. How would you describe the general memory of your soundscape while you were hiking along there?
Acadia, I would say, like, kind of thunderous, maybe pretty close to the shore.
Huh?
You're like up in the boundary waters, pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Being wind. And like, I can't really remember cicadas, but then like glacier kind of area, very quiet, wind, and yeah, just kind of wind, very quiet.
Very quiet and wind. Okay. So, things like leaf on, leaf off season, big difference in how far sounds travel. You and I, each of us, is acoustically equivalent to between 2 and 3 square meters of carpeting. And if you've ever been in like a old school recording studio, the walls are carpeted, the floor, the ceiling has fabric covered tiles because things like leaves and fabrics and human bodies covered in fabrics absorb a tremendous amount of sound and don't let it propagate further. So, when a professor stands up in front of a big lecture hall, sometimes they have to use those horrible low-quality microphones to be heard in the back row because everybody in the front rows are literally physically absorbing most of that person's voice by the time it gets to that back row. So for accessibility concerns and considerations, we want to make sure that every student can hear pretty well. As a park ranger, you're using that same property in your favor. The more vegetation cover you have across your park, the thinner the air is at your park, the less ability sound has to propagate. because those leaves are relatively big and heavy relative to the atmosphere gas molecules that is transmitting the sound up to that point, right? So it hits this, and the leaf doesn't even move visibly, but that sound energy is absorbed and gone, okay? So, we were talking about acoustic shadows on Monday. Here's an acoustically carpeted landscape in terms of leaves and needles. At dawn and dusk, we have fairly irregular and severely changing heating of the surface of the Earth, which leads to that adiabatic expansion of air we talked about on Monday. And what is adiabatic expansion of air at a human experience level but wind? So, when you're standing on the edge of a 1,000-foot cliff at sunrise, it gets really windy. It gets really windy, and it's loud. Okay? So that's a thing. Now, we also have the anthrophony, which is human-created sounds, some of which are going to be noise, some of which are not going to be noise. If you've ever had a nightingale or a whippoorwill set up its home right outside your bedroom window and you're a light sleeper, you might consider some forms of biophony to be noise as well. Like you're trying to get some sleep and you have this bird just constantly calling all night long. It's horrible. But humans, for our purposes in this class, are going to be most of the issue for annoying noises. Okay? So, things like our motor vehicle recreation. Jet skis, super loud. You can hear a good jet ski from, I don't know, half a mile away. And so at places like the Apostle Islands, where jet skiing is a very popular thing, it's a national seashore up on Lake Superior, they were finding that jet skiers were a tiny fraction of the visitation to Apostle Islands. Like relatively few people are showing up there with a jet ski, relatively very few people. But close to 100% of the visitors were hearing jet skis buzzing around and so forth kind of continuously during the day. And so the Apostle Islands Park Service staff had to have kind of a come to Jesus conversation with the local jet ski rental places, like, hey, you know, we respect and honor your need to make a living renting out these jet skis to tourists, and at the same time, a couple people are benefiting, and literally 100% of people are catching the negative consequences. So is there anything we could do about that? And so the jet ski concessionaires have to work with them, work with the rangers, you, and figure out, okay, where can we hide these jet skis acoustically? Can we have them only in this area over here while all of our hikers are over there? And if there's a bunch of sea cliffs, basically, in between them, those sea cliffs are going to reflect the sound back toward the jet skis and aim the rest of it up into the sky where it dissipates harmlessly. And folks over here, if we're doing our job right as rangers, they have no idea all day long that jet skis are even a thing at Apostle Islands. They might even think that jet skis aren't even allowed there if you're doing your job well. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is going to be one of those zoning solutions as you're thinking ahead to your park's soundscape needs. All right, the final component of what you can hear out in the wild is natural quiet. So that is basically everything that is not anthrophony. It's pretty quiet relative to what humans are bringing to the equation, and it is ubiquitous. There is no place, again, on the surface of the earth that is truly physically silent. There's no vibration of air molecules in a sound transmission kind of a way. Okay? So, natural quiet again at Rocky Mountain National Park during the daytime, about 35 decibels. A full 20 decibels less than somebody talking. Pretty quiet. So, that means if we have any noise sources at Rocky Mountain National Park, in particular any modified pipe motorcycles that are blasting out sound at 130, 140 decibels, like up above, up louder than a jet engine in some cases, then that's not just impacting all of the visitors. A single motorcycle can fill more than 100 square miles acoustically with noise. Yeah, and if you're thinking about the space above the surface of the Earth, that would be several hundred cubic miles of air volume. You got to deal with that, right? You have to have law enforcement rangers chasing down people with modified pipe bikes and saying, yes, we know a loud bike is a safe bike. Also, you're kind of killing the mood for literally 20,000 other people right now, so you got to stop. Here's a ticket. Go away. And you're also screwing with all of our terrestrial species because they're all hearing it too, and they are all impacted as well. So with Grand Canyon, let's see here. This is a long sort of stationary recording of the sunrise. It's almost silent, right? We're talking like less than 10 decibels, which is very, very, very quiet. Less than 10 decibels is that unnerving level of quiet that we're not used to hearing in our homes, in our classrooms, anything like that. That's down below what your noise canceling headphones will bring a reasonably noisy environment down to. It's quieter than that, even with active destructive interference of the projected sound waves from your headphones. Okay? So you'll notice with this time lapse, we can't hear anything. Except for people talking. People even talking in sort of low tones at 4:30 in the morning here is enough to puncture or rupture that natural quiet. Natural nighttime quiet at Rocky Mountain National Park is on average about 15 decibels. Barely louder than a legit whisper. Okay. So, even people talking is kind of a thing. So the task for us as park rangers is not to like slap a muzzle on people, you know, unless they're into that sort of thing, I guess. Instead, we gotta reach out to people and help folks understand, hey, even if you're just like having your morning coffee at the edge of the Grand Canyon, understand that even your quiet speech, like your private conversation between you and the person you showed up to the Grand Canyon with, enjoying your coffee with, enjoying a beautiful sunrise, that's awesome. That's why we're all here. That can be heard for hundreds of feet down the canyon, and a trail goes right down below there. And we'd really appreciate it if we all appreciated how hard it is to keep things quiet so that we can just hear the natural things instead of everybody's conversation, even if it's kind of a subdued conversation. Got to help people understand your normal behaviors, your normal expectations, they don't hold true with the different acoustic environment here, okay? If you're used to shouting over your loud family at dinner to get your point across to somebody, that's not appropriate here, and it's going to impact a lot more people than you realize. So we have these like conversations about noise with visitors as park rangers. It's a weird thing in the last 30 years. Okay? So our forest veg structure, right? Ground cover, mid-story, canopy. That's going to strongly affect that natural quiet. And natural quiet is typically a particular kind of sound called white noise, where if you're graphing the spectrogram, that is the volume at each pitch. So 2 kilohertz up to 20 kilohertz. White noise is an even frequency distribution of sound. It is all of the pitches at once. It sounds like it's just a rushing sound. It's white noise. It's static. If any of you remember your grandparents' TV not tuned to a station, that's white noise. Even frequency gram. Okay? We also can have brown noise or pink noise. And brown noise is this, but the low frequency, the lower pitch sounds are emphasized. So if you've anybody ever been to a really big waterfall? I mean like a really big waterfall. Maybe like Niagara Falls or something like that. Like a big waterfall in the spring when it's really going. Yeah? All right. When you, like that video earlier, when you first round the corner and you're walking towards that waterfall, it sounds pretty quiet, and you mostly hear the higher pitched rushing sound of the water from far away. Because high frequency sounds, just like high frequency light, or blue light instead of red light, penetrates a turbulent environment much farther than lower frequency stuff does. So, and this kind of holds true, and then it kind of holds true in the inverse in other places. So you might hear a waterfall from really far away as either or a kind of a sound. And then when you get really close to it, you can really hear that sort of bass rumble. You can kind of feel it in your chest. If you've ever been to Niagara Falls, it's like drumming on the air cavities of your chest. And you can hear the high-pitched rushing as well. Okay, so pink noise, high frequencies emphasized, brown noise, low frequencies emphasized, white noise, flat frequency response across the whole frequency range. All right, Michael.
This might be like something that's just not true at all, but I remember I was like getting a ride from someone and they were playing green noise. Is it like a, I don't know, rainbow or like a color wheel of sound, or is like green noise just something that they were advertising as like, oh, it's green noise?
Okay, white, pink, and brown are the ones that most acousticians use for EQing stuff. That is equalizing things, so manually tweaking frequencies on like a soundboard, something like that. Green noise is a less formal designation. It's usually an emphasis on mid frequencies. Yeah, because green light, mapping sounds onto color, green light is kind of halfway between-ish red and blue on the frequency spectrum. Red is low frequency, blue is high frequency, green in the middle. So yeah, it would be kind of a mid-tones emphasis. And in that case, it wouldn't be so much of a rushing sound. It can sound more like a hum if it's on a very, very tight band around that middle or green frequency range. It would sound more like a rushing sound the wider that arch is in the sonogram. Cool. There are a bazillion apps on the App Store for your phone. Some people find listening to white noise very, very calming and focusing. If you're trying to study, for example, because it just helps drown out all the noise because it's capturing all the frequencies. So if somebody's talking low, it's blocking that out if it's louder. And if somebody's talking high or playing music, it's blocking that out too, okay? Or masking that. So just a perceptual sense of sound and cognition and study skills for you out of this class. Don't say I never did nothing for you. Okay, sounds, right? We can produce an entire map of what's the typical natural sound loading or decibel level across the entire United States. This stuff is just math equations, right? This is all physics of air underneath the hood. So the way that we use this in park management is pretty much to take a look at where we're at on this map for your park. Am I in the very, very quiet end of things? So natural sounds on average 20 decibels in the Intermountain West. Okay. Deserts are very quiet places. Versus the buggy bayous of Louisiana that are just constantly buzzing with stuff. That's almost twice as many decibels. That's 38 to 40 decibels of natural quiet. Okay? So that's a big range. And again, when we put our infrastructure, our topological resources into a park, and we bring in cars, and we bring in AC units, and we bring in everything, right? If we zoomed in this map, it would be a bright, super bright green pixel, maybe a purple pixel, way off past the top end of this natural sound range. And if our park is a biosphere reserve, like most of them are, then that's a problem. So we want to pay attention to the sense of natural quiet. So white noise, brown noise. A stream is typically white noise. Flowing water. Fire, over time, it's making less of a continuous rushing sound and more of like a low pitch, high pitch, staccato, sap snapping or boiling out of the wood as it burns kind of a thing. But if you take a longer term average, that's a pretty wide frequency distribution. Sometimes it's a high frequency hiss or whine of steam coming out of the log. Sometimes it's a lower frequency sound of a chunk of the log as ember, just falling off and lumping into the softer ash and ember underneath. Wind can be low or high pitched. That's been captured as a metaphor for the keening wind, the moaning wind, the crying wind, the wind calling or singing, right? Because there is a pitch associated with that. Okay. So, here we go. Gentle waves, hydrophony. Sorry if we can't hear it over the, drills and stuff in the room. So as you listen to these, what does your blood pressure do? When I get out of the way and I stop talking, you relax a little bit, and tense up a little bit. Got to go to the bathroom. How about this? And some owls and crickets. So soft you may not even be able to hear it back there. Hearing certain kinds of sounds, in particular sounds of natural quiet, as long as it doesn't rely on a predator or something like that. This has a physiological effect on your pulse, on your skin conductance, on your serum stress hormone levels like cortisol, and so on and so forth. Even something that might be considered upsetting, like a thunderstorm, is actually really calming for a lot of people. Michael.
So, this might be like a parallel I'm drawing out of like nothing, but with like house music or a lot of like popular music, the reason why it's like so popular is because like your brain likes to guess the pattern, and sometimes it switches ever so slightly, and then when it gets it correct, you get like a serotonin or dopamine boost or something like that. Is there anything that like any parallels with like something like crickets or something like that, or is it like the randomness that keeps our brain like subconsciously entertained?
Very good. So we're talking about randomness bounded within an overall larger pattern, or pattern changes in the case of house music, bounded in larger patterns. So music is, again, purely mathematics, right? And so our brains are, this isn't strictly a Soundscapes answer to your question, but at a cognitive level, you and I and everybody else, our brains are contrast, enhancement, and recognition engines. We don't see a brick wall over there. We see a white and gray sort of field of view, and then there are sections of it that in regular patterns are darker and lighter. And those happen to be sort of the filleted grooves of the mortar in between the cinder blocks that define that wall. So we don't see bricks, we see light and dark, lines, curves, and so forth, and we are looking continuously around 30 times per second for changes to the patterns that we recognize to set up a contrast, to identify the fact that a change is happening as we sweep our eyes left to right, or listen to, like a super dirty trap song right before the bass drops or something like that. We learn to anticipate that and enjoy it because our brains are recognizing the contrast of, it was this pattern before and I figured that out, and I'm anticipating, I think the pattern's going to change like this, and ooh, it did. I got something right. That feels good. Serotonin and dopamine rewards. Or it's not exactly what I expected, but okay, I see this new pattern. That makes sense within this larger pattern of the song, or of the thunderstorm, or the pattern of owls and crickets, or whatever. It feels very, very good to anticipate reality, and it feels almost as good to figure out why or how the new reality after the bass drop or whatever, how that fits into our model of the world. It's very reassuring when we get some sense of reality. So when we can figure out reality, this is called cognitive dissonance when we can't do that. When our sensory inputs don't match our mental model, our brain literally cannot stay in that state of unreconciled sensory input versus sort of your mental model of the world of reality up to that moment. So this is why, for example, any of you guys have one of those like Oculus or PSVR or any of those like headset kits? All right, I had the original version 1 Oculus Rift developers kit, and it fucking sucked because the accelerometers and gyros weren't quite fast enough to keep up with the head tracking motion, and there was no optical reconciliation of the room around you. So, sometimes within a matter of seconds of putting it on, your brain starts triggering a nausea response of what I'm seeing doesn't match what I know my head is doing. And so there's this lag, and I can see sort of a blurry 3D room around me, but I'm seeing it through this pixelated screen door effect. That doesn't match how I think reality should look, right? I don't see a screen door effect here. Our brains are constantly intaking something like 110 megapixels of visual information 30 times a second. And we're really good at it. Like, you don't think about seeing, you just do it, right? But that's a phenomenal amount of processing. A huge chunk of our entire brain, our forebrain, is devoted to visual processing in the same way that it is devoted to smelling for most dog species, or dog breeds. So all that to say, yes, the fact of recognizing the pattern and not having to reconcile or change your mental model of reality to accommodate something that you're now perceiving, your brain rewards that. Your brain rewards that a lot. And that's why optical illusions are such a thing. That's why we haven't stopped writing music, because it's really, really satisfying to create something new, but it's not a totally random assortment of tones and sounds and things that don't recognizably fall into a rhythm or something like that. Just like we call that cacophony or pandemonium, right? That's a very stressful and unpleasant sensory environment, and that's in history playing just huge amounts of disorganized sound like that is literally a torture technique, right? It's considered inhumane captive punishment, and so forth. So, like, that's literally a war crime to do stuff like that to POWs, because it has such a negative effect on the human psyche. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. So, we love to see patterns. We love to hear patterns, and we love it when those patterns reflect our understanding of reality and we can start to sort of predict or expect them. Okay, great question about cognitive science. All right, luckily my wife is a PhD neuroscientist. Whew, man, what a lady. All right, so when we consider biophony, geophony, hydrophony, anthrophony, and the particular cocktails or mixes or arrangements and dynamics of those things throughout a day, a season, a year, at a particular park, that's a whole new kind of resource for us. And natural quiet is like this species, if you want to think of it that way, populating the ecosystem represented by the soundscape, right? This is the individual thing, the individual sound instead of an individual organism, inside the habitat for that sound or that organism. Right? Soundscape is the habitat, natural quiet is the thing, the entity. And it is a resource, a very, very fragile resource, and an intangible one. We can't put our hands on it like we can the walls of the Grand Canyon, but it is absolutely just as much a part of the experience of the Grand Canyon as being able to see the Grand Canyon. We know this by asking detailed questions of visually impaired people who have visited the Grand Canyon, and it is just as much a profound, even spiritual experience for somebody who can't see any of it. It sounds different, and it should sound different because it's a really different kind of soundscape. It's a different kind of environment. It's a huge resonator space that most people have never encountered the scale of any time before in their lives. So as of about 1990, remember, the National Park Service started to sort of get on the wagon of, okay, we need to protect this resource and even just learn more about it at our various parks, and we can serve as the benchmark, the natural quiet places all across the United States and around the world that we can kind of contrast all of our horrible city lives against and realize how much we're killing ourselves with noise. So we'll get into those stats here in a bit. All right. Wildlife also need that natural quiet to be able to identify mates, to reproduce, to remain alert to predators while in, like the rut, for example. They need to be able to identify and square off against sexual competitors, and they use sound to do that, right? If you've ever heard this very distinctive sound of antlers rattling, if you're backpacking alone or in a small group in elk habitat during the season of the rut, when you hear that sound, you go the other way, right? Because just like human beings, rutting elk are crazy and really pretty violent. So we need to understand that that is this acoustic property of the ability to mate is an absolutely crucial attribute of the ability to mate. Okay? If it's noisy, population's going to decline in quality and in size rapidly. So this is a big deal. Here we go. Further on, maybe? If it's too noisy for bull elk to hear this, their sexual competition is going to fail. Make sense? Okay, so this is pretty tough stuff. We don't need to listen to all of the different examples of it. These are the uau at Haleakala. Native Hawaiian pronounces each vowel independently. All right, so if we had to summarize this resource, here we go. Dank memes, no extra cost. There you go. And we kind of get an idea of this before having to tuck deeply into a whole bunch of research literature. This is in all kinds of literature, even things as old as the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is what? An epic poem like 4,000 years old now, something like that? 4,000 years? So sound as a component of narrative is so deeply ingrained on us that it kind of makes sense talking about elk in the rut from the perspective of soundscape. And just topography has a huge amount of effect on this, like we were talking about with acoustic shadows on Monday. So again, motorsports are lots of fun. I mean, there's a reason why so many thousands of people do this in each state every year. I mean, who wouldn't want to do this jet ski run through a slot canyon? I mean, that more than schlaps, as the youth might say. Like, that's genuinely a lot of fun. Also, this is genuinely extremely loud on site and nearby. So the only thing that's sort of letting this work is the fact that this is extremely rugged terrain and there's not a lot of other people around. So in order for folks to have a high quality motor vehicle recreation experience, that also generates a lot of noise as a byproduct. They're going to have to take up an absolute metric hecton of space. And sometimes that equation doesn't really work out. Sometimes you have too many people wanting to enjoy a space for a few people to be able to enjoy it in this way, right? So we have plenty of examples of people in all kinds of powered water and land craft making just absolutely wild amounts of noise. Now this is basically the watery version of an F1 race. Yeah, I mean, this is in essentially an engineered arena. And the death rate among high-speed boaters is sky high. If you want to live to 65, then don't follow me. All right. So this is a thing, right? And in this sport context, this kind of loudness is part of the experience. If you've ever been to a monster truck rally or a tractor pull, something like that, like half the fun is, watching the poor bastard in front of you who didn't bring hearing protections, watching his eardrums explode to the point where you see blood squirting sideways and like vibrating midair before it splatters on the grossed out people to either side. Like, it's that loud at some of these things. It's a blast. No pun intended. Okay. So, there is a lot of scientific research underpinning, all of this stuff. If you want to take a look at that, it's some pretty cool stuff. So, we'll just kind of float that idea out there. If you're super into sound, you can make a living doing this stuff. All right, so let's see. Dose response study at 95 dBA. 100% of kids flunk the test completely. They can't even answer any questions. And if we scale that up to not quite so loud, we don't all live in 95 decibels A-weighted of noise continuously. If we did, we'd basically all be dead. But if it's not quite that noisy, but you're exposed to that much noise your whole life, it literally kills you because you don't sleep as deeply. When you don't sleep as deeply, you don't heal as fast. You can't remember things as well. You don't think as hard. And you tend to have essentially low-grade continuous trauma effects on your body. So when you can't sleep, a lot of good stuff doesn't happen. And you have a heart attack. So somebody who lives next to an industrial park, maybe they retire at age 67, but they die at age 68 because they've been just a little bit sick their whole lives, just a little bit stressed out by all of that noise their whole lives. And this has developmental effects on children, right? As your brain is growing from sort of the tiny little thing it was when you were born up to the somewhat larger thing by the time you're about 25, that has effects that we can measure across entire populations. So, for example, disability-adjusted lost years. So if everybody dies 1 year earlier because they live in a very noisy city environment, we would call that one disability-adjusted lost year per person. So multiplied out across Western Europe, some 200 million people, we're losing 45,000 years of healthy human life. So people dying a year earlier, people being sick for 6 months before they die instead of just dying. Okay? Among children, just in Western Europe, every year. Okay? So this would be even indirectly reflected in stuff like kids who grow up in a very noisy environment have a harder time thinking and doing things like driving a vehicle safely, because everybody's just a little bit more distracted, everybody's a little bit more tired, everybody's a little bit more stressed, and not quite as able to be present and fully responsive in driving a vehicle, more car accidents. Make sense? So, noise has some real teeth to it. And when you sort of spread out this risk on a big scatter plot with millions of people or millions of people worth of data, you get a pretty clean and interesting relationship. You can graph it out. So for every 10 additional decibels of noise pressure hitting everybody's ears on average, the increase in risk goes up by a factor of 1 in 8, 12.5%. Pretty impressive. Humans are fantastically complex creatures. So, when you find a relationship this strong and this clear across billions of people with a B, that makes a lot of people with a lot of power kind of sit up and go, wait a minute. You're telling me that this amazing city of New York is killing its residents? Yes, that's exactly what this is saying. Okay? So if you grew up outside of Chicago, same thing. And these days, parks also give us a chance to confront, as a society, in the midst of the Pax Americana, the idea of non-biological sound perception. So people with tinnitus, like me, in particular veterans who have experienced diffuse brain injuries from improvised explosive devices or rounds going off near them and stuff like that, you can hear sound that's not actually out there. It can be a ringing or a rushing or a tapping or a crackling sound, and this is neurons misfiring in the inner ear or in the brain, or on the way to the brain, and this was not so much a thing before industrialized warfare, and in particular before the advent of headphones. But now we, for the first time in human existence, have essentially a couple of generations now, you, me, and the Gen Xers, who've grown up with headphones and synthetically loud sounds in the form of music that cause damage, which leads to things like tinnitus. And parks are quiet places where a lot of people, believe it or not, discover that they have tinnitus for the first time. Because when you grow up hearing that ringing sound in your ears all the time, you come to think that that's normal, and that everybody has that. That is not the case. Okay. So let's take one more look at this. Disability-adjusted lost years of healthy human life. And across all of Europe, Western Europe, all adults and children, there is a loss of more than 500,000 years, 500,000 years of human life every year as a result of all of these things, right? So if you have a noisy neighbor and you're kind of grouchy for like a whole semester and your grades aren't doing so well because you just can't effing get to sleep, that has an effect on people, right? It can drive people to harm themselves or to harm other people. So all of this ends up in the statistics, and we all suffer when any of us is suffering as a result of this. Okay? So we should note that these studies, these statistics are coming out of the European Union, which has way more aggressive noise control laws than does the United States. So you and I, we hear a lot of traffic noise in the United States, and quite frankly, guys, it's not like that in a lot of other countries. In a couple of weeks, my wife and I are going to travel to Tokyo again to see some of her family, and Tokyo is 25 million people. Like, it's a dozen St. Louis's straight up. And it's all like Tokyo, not just like Tokyo and Chicagoland. It's like just Tokyo, and then there's more beyond that. And walking down the street in Tokyo is way quieter than it is in Carbondale because there's less road noise. There's a lot less gunning of engines. There's a lot less honking. There's a lot less like real noisy tailpipes and stuff like that. So think about that. A city of 25 million people is noticeably quieter during the day, during the middle of the day, than a town-sized city, Carbondale, in the United States, right? So our policy choices, the way that you run your national park as a ranger, has some real effect. You're not just throwing up your hands and going, well, I guess we'll just die now because it's loud, right? You have a ton of control over this particular resource in a way that we don't have control over stuff like climate impacts to your park. Okay. We get noise from all the areas you would think. Let's talk real quick about those sound attributes, okay? So beyond just the volume of the sound, we need to think about, is it a mechanical sound? A helicopter is among the helicopter sounds are among the most annoyingly rated, most negatively rated visitor perceptions in any park anywhere. Except, this is a really interesting finding, this is a human thing, except when the sound type, even if it's mechanical and super loud and repetitive and kind of hurts your ears a little bit, when you think or when you believe, whether or not you're true, when you believe that that helicopter is a life flight taking somebody out to safety, you don't think that's annoying anymore. Isn't that interesting? So there's a subjective evaluation of the sound again that sorts it into noise or not, regardless of whether it's loud and mechanical and not natural or whatever. All right? Obviously, volume is a thing. Periodicity is it a repeated sound? Is it like a bird song where it's the same call over and over and over? And if it's a bird song, is it the same bird song call over and over and over? Or is it unique every time? All right, so periodicity is what's the length of time between repetitions? Is this multiple times per second in the case of a rotary wing aircraft like a helicopter or an autogyro, or is it less periodic sounds but repeated sounds with a long period in between them, like gunshots or bells tolling, stuff like that? Those tend to be much more annoying because you get used to the sound and then you get used to the silence and then the sound interrupts you again and then you get used to the sound and then the silence. That's very annoying. All right, duration, just the overall length of time of the sound, is super important, as well as the pitch. High-pitched voices, high-pitched sounds considered more annoying. So as an interesting side note with this, we're getting into the presidential primaries, at least on the Republican side, as of this year's recording. And lady politicians are trained to speak in a lower register of their voices, speak at a lower pitch, because that polls more positively with people to talk at a lower pitch. Not necessarily a lower volume or anything like that, not changing the speed of your speech or even the words, just at a lower pitch. And for whatever reason, humans tend to ascribe more sort of trustworthiness and authority and charisma to a lower sounding voice. Isn't that weird? In fact, did you know this? The pitch of a man's voice is inversely and strongly correlated to the number of children he has. So the deeper your voice, the more likely you are to have more children. And you are strongly likely to have more children with a lower voice. So I guess you could say my wife and I are an anomaly because we decided not to have kids. Right. So strongly rhythmic noises like the whoop, 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 whoop of helicopter blades, most annoying. So mechanical sounds tend to check most or all of the boxes for annoying sounds. Okay. That attribution, though, a medical evacuation helicopter versus a non-evacuation helicopter, maybe like a tourism helicopter that somebody else is enjoying and that's pissing you off, that's a question of attribution. What do I think is the reason for this sound? We might define attribution as, okay? And then more subsequent research. When I was in grad school back in the day, we did some research at places like Muir Woods, Rocky Mountain National Park, places like that where Soundscape is a very, very sort of in-your-face kind of a high-quality resource. People describe Muir Woods as it feels like you're going to church. Like it's very, very quiet there, and it's these huge vertical forms in the case of the trees. And it's like walking into a Gothic cathedral, but not one built by the hands of man. John Muir called it a cathedral more beautiful than any that humans could possibly build, and we named that set of woods after him. In places like that, we found that the number of minutes or seconds between any kind of human sound where you can hear just natural quiet stuff, that's a hugely, hugely forcing factor on the quality of somebody's visit. So if your park has a real busy visitor center and no trail starting from the visitor center that gets people out in the woods away from all that traffic and noise and kids screaming for the bathroom and stuff like that, like that's a problem because people are short-tempered, they're not as healthy in that noisy environment at your national park. So let's get them on a trail. Let's just get them walking among the trees where it's even just a little bit quieter to crank up that human noise-free interval statistic, and all of a sudden people are feeling real good about their choice to go to your park instead of real bad about it. Okay? And then this is a related statistic, the percent of time the natural sounds are audible or obscured by noise, right? So the louder sound obscures the softer sound at the same pitch or frequency. We also have some interesting effects of different activities. So for example, for those of you who are rock climbers, picture yourself up on the wall. Now picture yourself hearing a whole bunch of loud vehicles going by and breaking your concentration while you're up on the wall in a potentially serious injury or even life-threatening injury type situation if you make the wrong dynamic move on your sport route. Can you see why rock climbers evaluate noises more negatively than campers do? And they like the quiet sounds of nature. They care more about it. They need that more than the campers do. Does that make sense? All right, so when you're compiling your document for your particular national park, I need you to think about what are my primary activities and do they interface with these resources differently than anybody else? Do my horseback riders need to be completely separated from any kind of backcountry plinking, that is target shooting with a gun? Do I need to keep my horseback riders away from that so that my plinkers, who don't even know that the horseback riders are nearby, maybe within a mile, other side of the valley or whatever, if my plinkers are creating sharp, staccato, unexpected sounds for those horses to startle a mile away, well then, I need to think about that. Okay? So, think about your different activities at your park. And that doesn't have to be a super long list, like what are the top 2, 3, 4 key activities at the park? And how do they interact with respect to sound? with sound, we can reach out and touch somebody way further away than we can with most forms of visual impact, like crowding and stuff like that. Okay? New Zealand valley floor glacier hikers evaluated aircraft noises as less annoying than ridgetop hikers. When I was hiking the AT in the summer of 2004, we did not like when A-10 Warthogs were practicing strafing runs on the section of the Appalachian Mountain ridgeline that we were hiking on. Because it's quiet, it's quiet, it's quiet. Oh God, it's an A-10! And then it's quiet, it's quiet, it's quiet. Oh God, it's an A-10, right? And that effect was really pronounced because we were right up against the A-10s on their low-angle practice strafing runs, because you want to get like coaxial with that big old Vulcan cannon for that sweet, sweet BERT to, you know, send a bunch of depleted uranium slugs right through tanks and stuff like that. But in order to do that, you gotta strafe pretty low, and that's a thing. Also, they're really slow flying aircraft, so they were near us a lot longer than something like an F-22 Raptor would be. And for people down in the valley, they could hear that same plane, but way off in the distance, so not a big deal. Okay? So, placement of your trails relative to soundscape conditions, relative to specific activities, makes a difference. All right? When people go backpacking in Haleakala Crater, that is one of the quietest places on the face of the planet. Single digit at night natural sounds. So the issue at Haleakala Crater looks something like this acoustically. You have a 10,000 foot volcano. So 2 miles high, pretty tall. And then 2,000 to 3,000 feet below the crater rim, we have the crater floor. And this is a wilderness. So any sounds that are happening outside of this crater with its 2,000 foot high walls that are basically vertical, you can't hear any of it. You could have a rock blasting quarry out here. You could have, and you do have, a whole bunch of tourism helicopters flying around and circumnavigating this volcano. It's the entire east half of the island of Maui. It's gorgeous and stuff like that. The TV show Lost was partially filmed around here. And you can't hear any of it. Like, literally, it's not even like a faint sound. You just flat out can't hear it because the sound is propagating out, and where it hits this is getting reflected up and away from any hearers up in this wilderness valley. So, single digit nighttime audio level for humans. This is one of the places, this is the only place where I have, so you can hear your own pulse in your ears. It's wild. It's crazy. You know, like in horror movies when like it's loud, like slasher music, and then it gets real quiet and you're like, oh no, it's about to be a jump scare. It's like that all night long and most of the day up here at Haleakala Crater. But when you have a helicopter that is not down here, but as they like to do, emitting sound down into the crater, everybody can hear it, no matter where you are in the crater, even if you are 7 miles away at the opposite end, because you've got 2,000 foot high reflectors taking this sound and bouncing it right back to you. And it's doing that 360, okay? So, topography makes a difference, and people are willing to work very hard and pay a ton of money to get to places like Maui, which is a long flight. It's an expensive flight. Everything on the island costs like 5 times as much as everywhere else. And when they do the hard work, they got to backpack for a couple of days just to get down into that wilderness crater valley. they're pretty mad, and justifiably so, when some jackwagon paying $300 for his tourism helicopter flight ruins your whole day because it just shatters that silence or that natural quiet and just completely takes it over. Okay? So, this is something that people, they don't care, they don't notice, they don't care, they don't notice, they don't care, until they notice and care, and then it's like all they can think about, and they're furious because their trip has been ruined by somebody else. So, noise is a thing. All right, here we go. This is a map of the positive correlation relationship. So, increasing awareness, the percentage of people noticing a noise, and their average, how bothered they are by on it, like a scale of 1 to 10, how pissed off were you when you heard this sound, is kind of the survey question that's getting asked there. We get a pretty tight correlation there, right? So there's a bit of a cone of uncertainty around sort of the average relationship here. But by and large, you can see all that point cloud is kind of strung out along that line. That's a pretty strong relationship there. And humans are weird, we're illogical, we're goofy. Some of us have like anime waifus and stuff. Like, we don't make any sense. So when you see a strong, clear relationship like this in the data, pay a lot of attention to it, okay? So, to the extent that anything is noticeable, the more noticeable it is, the more likely it is to be annoying, okay? So, let's take a look real quick, and we'll probably end here-ish. Now, we'll try and do night sky stuff real quick. Rocky Mountain National Park. So, you take a map of Rocky Mountain National Park. You import into that a roads layer. And for every section of that road, you have detailed information on traffic. Like every 15 minutes throughout a 24-hour period, how many vehicles and what kinds of vehicles are traversing that section and at what speed. What kind of tires do they have? What kind of pavement is it? There is low noise pavement, believe it or not, and there is very loud pavement. If you've ever been driving on the highway and you hit a section kind of striped with those sipes, and you hear that high-pitched sort of humming sound as your tires go over those, right? That is a pavement management decision to increase safety in that case, but it does make it much, much louder. All right, so we get detailed road and traffic information. And then, so roads are our noise sources here at Rocky Mountain National Park, overwhelmingly. Vehicles are super loud at Rocky. Then we have a whole bunch of people on a whole bunch of miles of trails. That's the brown layer, okay? And so we take a whole bunch of hikers at Rocky Mountain National Park, we strap a GPS to them, and we shove them down the trail and go, all right, just give us a GPS back when you're done. So we know exactly how and where and how fast and why, and so on and so forth. People are moving throughout the system. So you throw this topography layer, like a DEM, digital elevation model, a roads layer, a vegetation or surface cover layer, because right, vegetation absorbs a lot of sound. We throw a flowing water layer in there so we can get a sense of hydrophony. And out from dedicated software called Cadna A, which is a European Union, basically GIS package to figure out soundscapes, we get a heat map like this. So this red snake here, that's the Bear Lake Road. And this loop at the end of it is the Bear Lake Road parking lot. That blue thing right there is, you guessed it, Bear Lake. Okay? So we have a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of like shuttle buses, diesel trucks, regular passenger cars. They're all trying to get up this to here. This is a very, very busy parking area, and it is just absolutely swarming with people. In 2007, 2008, when we're doing this study, right before the park institutes a not quite mandatory, but really good idea shuttle bus system to get most of the cars out of this lot, based on this research. Okay, so we set out a whole bunch of microphones all throughout this area, record day and nighttime sound pressure levels, a whole bunch of bird song, maybe Swainson's thrushes or warblers, I don't know. Anyway, and you create sort of an average heat map or surface of, okay, how noisy is it? So bright red here, it's about 65 decibels, which is loud enough that if you're standing right next to the side of the road, you have to kind of raise your voice in order to be heard over the sound of the car blasting by at 35, 45, 55 miles an hour. Okay? At the far end, the very cool looking end, or the very quiet end of this map, we have something like anything more than that daytime average of 25 A-weighted decibels, right? All the black out here, noise from the road isn't reaching that far. At that point, it's quieter than the natural sounds, so we don't care how loud it is, right? Because the natural sounds are louder, they're obscuring what very faint engine sounds or tire contact patch sounds we could hear. So, we take all that GPS data, we take the sound layer, we take the trails layer, and we create a whole bunch of little virtual hikers, and we run basically 1 million years of human life, people hiking along, virtual people hiking along these trails, and we record the conditions that they, or analyze the conditions that they are experiencing at every step along the way, every 5 seconds of their little virtual hike, or what have you. And we generate from that a noise profile. If you walk along this route like this little blue hiker is, what do you hear and how loud is it throughout that hike? Okay, here is a more tightly coded, instead of contour lines, we're using actual pixel values spot by spot. So again, red, hot, loud, 65 decibels, blue, silent in terms of noise. It's just natural quiet out at this end. Okay, and white is somewhere in between 25, 35 decibels, 45 decibels up in that space. Okay, so imagine hiking for a couple hours and you never get out of the red. That is, you're hiking for 2 hours, and at no point during your hike were you able to lower your voice to just talk with the person hiking next to you. That's how loud this road corridor is at a national park. And this is the data to show that, okay? So, it's a little bit hard to visualize soundscapes a little bit, but using GIS we can do exactly that and walk through it in 2 dimensions, or I'm writing software to be able to navigate this in 3, in like a first-person video game style format, walking through a soundscape. All right, so this is the loop that little hiker was hiking before. Let's take a look at a similar track, but not that particular one. And this is the noise level heard by that little virtual hiker, or actual real human hikers carrying the GPSs to generate this data. This is how their hike sounds the whole time. All right? So the critical threshold is 25 A-weighted decibels. This is the daytime average loudest natural sound pressure. So halfway between these 2 hash lines, we can actually hear the birds. Okay? So this is a hike, not that loop, but this one right here. So starting at the Bearstadt Lake trailhead, switch backing up, this is a ridge line here, and you see how it's an acoustic shadow on the back side or the north side of this ridge. It's less red north of that, right? So you drop down the back side of the ridge and it's quieter. Walk around Bearstadt Lake and then hike west and south and finish your hike over here, having walked past Bear Lake. Okay, so steep switchbacks, make it across that acoustic shadow, that ridge line, drop down the backside of that ridge, go around the backside of Bearstadt Lake, farther away from the road, in a whole bunch of vegetation that is absorbing that sound before it can get to your ears, come back to the near side of the lake, and then walk towards Bear Lake, and not until you get way into your hike, 6 kilometers, well, in this case it's just over 5, that person first heard natural quiet sounds, which are fantastic at Rocky, guys. It's a wonderful place to go. You should go there, please. before climate change completely destroys it. Anyway, that person had to walk like 5 kilometers. That's a couple of miles. And just hearing road noise after road noise after road noise. So car, no, that one's a bus, car, okay, that's somebody's diesel pickup, Hemi, and so on and so forth. Like, you're more than an hour into your hike, 2 miles in, over difficult terrain, right? That's a steep slope that you have to get up and get down. And then when you're back at the slope, it's just as loud as standing next to the road. And you're an hour into your hike before you hear natural quiet. Guys, it shouldn't be like that at a national park, right? We are the gold standard for the world. We are leading the charge on this stuff. Until we start looking at it and it's like, ooh, we got some things to do to fix this. Now, on the upside, we absolutely can do a ton of stuff to fix this, right? Soundscapes are highly responsive to management in a way that we can change something and tomorrow the soundscape is healthier. The experience is nicer. It's healthier for the humans, as well as the wildlife and so forth, the next day. Like, that's pretty encouraging. Versus with wildlife, you know, we've been working on reintroducing and repopulating bison for the better part of a century now. And we're getting there, but that's like 5-6 generations of wildlife biologists working on that problem. This, we can flip the switch on stuff and change things tomorrow, okay? So, our main application is hide trails in forested areas. People like walking in the woods, anyway. And hide behind topographic acoustic shadows. So one question to us from the National Park Service, to this research group, was, we know that it's super loud at Bearstadt Lake Trailhead because Trailhead is right on the side of the road and buses and stuff are whizzing by, and we know it's a super steep hike to get folks over to that acoustic shadow on the far side. Should we, like what's more pleasant for people? Do we just send them kind of straight up the slope like that and just get them to the acoustic shadow as fast as possible? Or do we like run the trail kind of along the road for a while and climb a lot more gently, so make it an easier hike but a much longer, noisier hike? We can answer those questions by running those analyses and stuff like that, okay? So, this is okay. This can work in a heavily forested environment. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, right in the middle of peak season after Memorial Day. This is like 2 days after Memorial Day. We're 150 yards from the road. Crucially, we're behind an acoustic shadow. There's a ridge that cuts off the road from us. And you can't hear any buses, you can't hear any vehicles, anything like that. Doesn't matter how many people are on the roads if you can't hear them, okay? Highly responsive to our choices. So, if we take a look at the important case study of Muir Woods, kind of finish this stuff out, we have to deal with ATV and UHV traffic, right? They want to go everywhere. They want to, or no, I don't want to other them. We on our ATVs want to go everywhere. We want to do it at high speed, which means high noise, and we want to do it with maximum excitement level. Like when I kick that throttle, I want to feel it in my whole body. So that means I'm going to be encouraged to use areas where we can concentrate that noise, so that we can concentrate that noise in a few spots and hammer the hell out of those areas acoustically and let everywhere else be nice and quiet. Okay? So if you've ever been restricted to a particular activity in a particular area, nowadays acoustics are one of the primary reasons for doing that.
Okay, so what the...
So with Muir Woods, they went through this long sequence of trying to figure out what's going on in these gigantic tree stand of Muir Woods. So they asked folks in what's called an importance performance analysis. This is an IPA that doesn't have any hops. You ask, all right, what did you hear? And how much did it matter to you that you heard it? There are a couple of different ways to nuance that, like how annoying was it that you heard it, or how nice was it that you heard it, but how much did you hear it really is kind of the heart of that. And you get this kind of a graph out of it. So Muir Woods, again, is a very cathedral-like environment. People instinctually lower their voices and they stop moving and walking on the boardwalks there in a way that causes loud footfalls. They sort of inch or creep along, and like their posture changes. Like people are a little bit more, they're not making near as many like large full body muscular motions, running around, stuff like that, chasing each other. They're like tiptoeing around low key. All right, so we have this graph of very annoying to very pleasing. So yay, I'm happy that I heard it. Boo, I'm sad that I heard it. And then what percentage of people heard that? And we get loud group, loud adult, grounds care. Think about that. One of the worst things that you could possibly have or hear at Muir Woods, because it's the most disruptive to that sort of serene or almost otherworldly or hallowed ground sense of this place being a natural cathedral, is stuff like urban forestry, tree care, repairing the boardwalk. People absolutely hate hearing that stuff. And so the Park Service took to doing those things in off hours, because this audio, this acoustic experience at Muir Woods is such an overriding part of the experience, the opportunity of enjoying Muir Woods and seeing these gigantic redwoods. Okay, so people of an unknown group talking. Almost everybody heard that, and on a scale of +4 to -4, that's a -2. That's 3/4 of the way to super bad. Okay, so you as a park ranger, when you're talking with folks about to go on a hike at Muir Woods, what do you encourage them to do? What do you encourage them not to do? What do you start writing tickets for? This importance performance analysis, after it's done with a whole bunch of people, gives you a fairly detailed and highly calibrated sense of what specifically do I need to help these people get protected from in terms of this soundscape. Hey, when you're out there, have a blast, but please keep your voice as low as you can. And you might try, this particular trail is about 1.5 miles long. It's on boardwalk. It's an amazing hike. This is one of the most famous and popular hikes in the world, bar none. See what it's like to hike that 1.5 miles without saying a single word. So when you as a ranger issue a positive challenge to your visitors, that solves the negative problem of people hearing very annoying noises, and most everybody hearing those very annoying noises, and it adds a layer of new opportunity to the opportunity of this world-class hike. I'm not just going to go hiking in a world-famous spot. I'm going to see if I can do it in a particular way without saying a word. And most folks are capable of that, so that's a pretty easy win-win-win, right? For you, for that particular group, and for all the other groups that might be affected by their noise or not affected by it, okay? At the very pleasing end of things, water, wind, bird song, bird chatter, animal, small mammal, insects. People are in none of that list. People are in all of this list. Child crying, trash lid, cell phone, radio, concession, vehicle, unknown passenger or bus, vehicle, right? All of the human stuff, super bad. All of the natural stuff, super good. People care strongly about this stuff. These results are highly consistent across people. Because we are averaging these results across hundreds or thousands of respondents, what that law of large numbers is going to do is try and pull all these values in towards the middle. So anytime you see anything way at the +4 or way down at the -4, yeah, people are uniformly pissed or hype, as the youth say, about things at either end, okay? It is hard to get a bunch of humans to agree on anything, right? So when they agree on stuff like this and sort things out to one end of this graph at very annoying or very pleasing, We want to pay a ton of attention to that and manage real hard in that direction. So, for your national park, do you have any areas like the Crater Wilderness at Haleakala that are going to be naturally very, very quiet? And people are really going to know it if there's a bunch of annoying human sounds. Is your whole park shot through with a whole bunch of roads and there's not really any acoustic shadows anywhere, there's not a whole bunch of intervening vegetation to ablate or absorb the sound, and you're kind of screwed in terms of the soundscape? Think about what your park is like, right? So mountains are our friends here. Tree cover is your friend here. Large spaces to spread people way out and to zone different kinds of noisy uses away from other sensitive kinds of uses. That's your friend, okay? That works in your favor. Okay, so we wrap up this study with going back from asking folks, okay, what do you like, what don't you like? And we start getting the next set of things. Okay, what would you prefer? So a preference is like, or similar to an attitude. So you ask, what level of noise are you okay with? We can more finely tune this stuff. So, as we play synthetic noise clips, basically, first one's natural quiet. Second one, for a little bit of time, you can just very softly hear like engines and people talking and kids running around and stuff like that. By the time you get to tape 5, it's all that you can hear. Engines, people talking, trash can lids banging, stuff like that, and so forth. And you ask them, how acceptable is this on a scale of +4 to -4? And you can see exactly where it crosses from, yeah, it's perfect at 4, to, nah, I mean, it's kind of okay, it's fine, I guess, at 2, to, I'm kind of neutral about it, I'm not happy about it, I'm not unhappy about it, at 0. And then as we get into overwhelmingly human-caused sounds, this isn't acceptable at any level. There's nothing okay with this. Let's leave and never come back and be pissed off about it the rest of our lives. We wasted our trip there. What this does is this is called a norm curve graph. What this norm curve does is lets you know how much of this noise pollution you can tolerate. It might be very expensive to get the whole condition for everybody up to a perfect situation of only natural quiet all the time for all people. That may not even be physically possible if you have a noisy highway next to your national park, for example. So, if the still positive condition is just slightly degraded, but people are still pretty okay with that, like 2, 3 plus on this scale of -4 to +4, okay, then people are still pretty happy with it, and we don't have to crucify ourselves on this quest to be perfect, because that may not, again, be even possible, okay? So, when we ask people about acceptability or preference of noise pollution, of haze and visibility, stuff like that, water pollution, wildlife population degradation at your park, this graph right here lets you know, okay, what can I actually do? What can I realistically target? And what can I get away with? Like, I can't be perfect, but what do I need to accomplish in order to be good enough, right? 2+ on the acceptability graph, just to pick a number. Okay? So again, this is called a norm curve. We're asking about normative evaluations, broadly shared evaluations across a lot of people to figure out what we need to do in management response. All right? Cool. There we go. Let's see. So that's what Muir Woods looks like. You can pack up. We're out of time. But, yeah. So as you're packing up, I'll play these sound clips.
While listening to this series of recordings,
This is
imagine
actual
yourself
recordings
to
used
be
in the study
walking
by the Park
along
Service,
the
so it's a stream, and the biophony of the leaves rustling in the wind, birds and stuff like that. That's sound clip 1, right? Everybody loved that. 4 out of 4. Sound clip 2, people liked okay. Let's see here.
Please close your eyes.
Listen close so you can still kind of hear people talking. A little bit. It's kind of the same frequency range as the stream, which is masking it a little bit. But by the time you get to number 5, see you later.
Please close your...
This is the actual condition.
Now, please respond to the questions for tape 5.
Okay. So, we interrogate folks with a survey, figure out what they want, what they will not stand for, and then we can actually manage to that. Pretty cool stuff. All right, see you Monday.